Hello and thank you for joining us. In this edition of Resource PNG, we showcase companies that participate in the International Investment Summit that was staged in Port Moresby recently. The companies of interest are Esso Highlands, Newcrest Mining and Cloudy Bay Sustainable Forestry. To start off, we have a panel discussion about how these big heavies, Esso Highlands Limited and Newcrest Mining, have handled their investment in PNG.
What impacts have you observed or in your own projects as far as the development of local business in the projects? Maybe we'll start with you, Greg.
Sure. Well, I think it varies whether it's a project or an operation. Just as background, Newcrest has a very well-developed operation over at Lihir, which has been in operation for over 15 years, and so the community impacts are far more obvious. And then we have a smaller mine in Hidden Valley, which is a shorter life, 10-year operation. And then we have a very large project that we're now considering at Wafi Golpu, and that's principally the Golpu section of that. So if I looked at the community impacts, the immediate ones are really focused around Lihir, and if I sort of divided down where those business opportunities and impacts are, clearly in infrastructure around, roads, ports, transportation, those areas, and certainly working with the people on the island and people in PNG. Lihir, just for people's information, is now, I think we're about 93% PNG workers, all the way through the management group. Clearly there are some technical areas that we still bring in to operate on the mine, but 93% and growing. And when we look at the landowner groups and the contracting companies working in with that operation now, it is actually quite a profound effect. Again, whether it's in the transportation areas, the service of food, service, cleaning, accommodation, some of the civil engineering work that we do around the site, again, most of that is contracted out to local companies and has a great effect. If I think about training and education, again, it's early days for us in Morobe province, but if you have a look at what's going on at Lihir, you'll see the sort of thing we're going to be aiming at. We currently have 125 apprentices sitting on Lihir Island doing all the technical disciplines. We have over 250 people doing training in different components on the mine, whether it's in the mill, it's in the open pit, sitting there on the environmental side. And we take 30 graduates a year. So again, a very large, sustainable operation like that shows great opportunity for both training and education. And I'll just make one other point, and this is certainly the one that probably I think has the most profound impact, is certainly the health and the safety side. And again, on Lihir Island now we're up to, I think we've got 5 doctors and 28 nurses working in the health centre. And last year we had, I think they tallied up, we had over 80,000 visitations into that health centre. And so again, it's had a very important impact on the people on the island. So I think they're good things, and that is an operation that's been in operation for 15 years, and that's contributed nearly 7.5 billion kina through employee wages, contracting with local, the local companies both in Lihir Island and off, and then certainly through royalties and tax and the things that are more obvious. But they do have a real impact. And again, as I look at Morobe, I haven't talked about that, we're at the start gate on that one. And that is going to be a very significant investment for us.
Peter, ExxonMobil has been quite intimately involved in actually building a business sector around your project in order to get it going, hasn't it? Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yes, we've put quite a bit of effort into building capacity in the supplier groups in PNG. One of the decisions we took early on was to try and focus on building capacity, and we set up through the Institute of Business and Banking the Enterprise Centre here in Port Moresby. The specific aim to help develop capacity and enable small suppliers in the country to take advantage of the opportunities that would exist as flow-on benefits from the construction of the project. And I think that's played out particularly well. I think there have been some opportunities that we've seen to improve that if we did it again. The Enterprise Centre, I think, played a very useful role in helping link potential suppliers to contractors. One of the challenges that suppliers often face is finding out just what those opportunities are and then gearing up to be able to take advantage of them. And again, through the Enterprise Centre, Sweater's here today, set up a database which facilitated that process where we could get our major contractors to come in, talk about the opportunities they had, and try and link up the suppliers to those contractors. One of the things I think we might do a little differently next time around is to think about the scopes of some of the contract work that we'll let. That typically schedule's all important in getting a major project underway, and contractors look to work with other major suppliers and find the most expeditious way to get the work done. Scopes of work often were too large for many of the PNG suppliers to really take the work on. And I think with hindsight, we would probably look to ways to chip off pieces of work or scopes of work to enable some of the local suppliers to more actively participate in some of what otherwise are impossibly large scopes to deal with.
So that's something that really, to develop a capacity amongst those businesses to actually deal with larger projects. Is that a likely thing that can happen? And do these businesses grow? I mean, I know they grow, but could they grow to the stage where they can then take on larger projects?
I mean, from my perspective, yes. Yeah. I mean, we've already seen some of the umbrella landowner companies develop, significant capability to compete really with anyone who fronts up to take on work. And one or two of them in particular have done exceptionally well. I mean, we've spent something like in excess of 1 billion kina with landowner companies in PNG on the project to date, of a total of 5 billion kina spent in PNG so far.
After the break, we talk about opportunities that these two companies are taking advantage of. To operate a business in PNG, especially in a remote location, is a very taxing exercise, especially for a new company. But where there is a will, there is a way. Companies like Newcrest Mining and Esso Highlands have the drive and have tailored their approach to our country's conditions.
And would it be true to say, Greg, that one of the reasons why these projects have a significant business benefit is simply because of the sheer size of the project and the length of the investment? It enables an ecosystem of business to be created around these projects that couldn't exist if it was a shorter term project.
It is a very important point. A lot of mining developments can be quite short life. In the gold industry, the average life of a deposit is generally around 10 years. And if you're looking at a mining development, that's not going to really develop all of those local businesses to the extent you want. The blessing in resources in Papua New Guinea is that they are very large deposits and they are very long life, and that really gives you a sustained time period really to build these businesses. We've got some good examples on Lahire. We started with a group, Nationwide Catering Services there, that I think they started with 2 or 3 people. They're now a really major service organisation into Lahire, and they're doing work for us, providing catering and cleaning up at Hidden Valley. And that's taken a 10-year journey. And I think I was just making a note to myself as Peter was talking, actually, and saying, the scope breakdown is actually the key for local business, really breaking it down, making people understand what is available, and then matching capabilities. It is a difficult process, but over time, longevity, you can build it.
So just looking forward to both your projects in PNG, what kind of opportunities do you see coming forwards over the next 5 years based on your planned investment in this market? Let me start with you first, Peter.
I mean, it's difficult to know where to start on that. There's just a myriad of opportunities, I think, that are out there to support the next several years of the construction phase of the project and then going forward beyond that. We chose, as part of our national content plan, to reserve certain areas of work for landowner companies. That was labour hire, security, camp catering, camp maintenance, and light vehicle transportation, just to make it a little easier for some of those companies to get started. And I mean, they still have to be competitive, but at least it gave them some specific areas to focus on. And I think, for the most part, that's been very successful, rather than people trying to become all things to all people. In terms of going forward, I think it's everything from micro businesses. I mean, we see women's groups in the Highland, for example, setting. We help them set up with essentially drum ovens, and they're out there on the side of the road selling scones and other food to workers and other people in the area, and also servicing the local markets, and all the way up to quite sophisticated businesses like Trans Wonderland Trucking, which is now a major logistics company in PNG, and I think will be very successful at that particular business.
Greg, your own thoughts about what you're going to need? Have you got your shopping list written up?
I think all that, certainly in Morribee, is the change for us as we sit with our partner Harmony and contemplate Golpu, which is a $5 billion development to the start line in 2019, and then ultimately another $5 billion over the next 10 years. And you go through everything Peter's just mentioned, and you look at all the services into that. There is enormous opportunity. You'd add healthcare to it. You'd probably add the training and education componentry to it. I mean, it really is a generational commitment to keeping your workforce as domestic as possible.
These companies are certainly focused on ensuring their national employees are trained to world standards. When we return, we look at community benefits. Since reports of a slowdown of China's economy, mineral prices have experienced a drop. There has been much discussion about how resource companies should look at this. But at a national scale, how do Newcrest Mining and Esso Highlands feel about this?
We heard earlier on today from Michael Pascoe, who was quite bullish about China in the future. I'm just wondering if you both share his views about the way the market's going, what the opportunity might be over the next sort of 20 to 30 years.
Well, for the natural gas business, I think we have quite optimistic outlook for growth, particularly in the Asia-Pacific region. And I think that's not just a short-term outlook, that's likely for the next 30 years or 30 years plus. And I think Papua New Guinea is ideally placed geographically to take advantage of those growing markets. So, I think the opportunity for Papua New Guinea is there to be had. It's a matter of delivering on the commitments that we make, and certainly from our perspective, what's really important to us is making sure we deliver our project as scheduled in 2014, because that's what's going to demonstrate to the world that Papua New Guinea can indeed service markets and meet its commitments.
And I guess the issue is, I remember when we been doing business in PNG since 2006, and when we came here, things were pretty quiet. I remember going to see Greg Anderson at the Chamber of Mines, and he told me how many members he had, and it was a modest member compared to the number of members he has now. He has a significant increase now over the last 7 years. There is a kind of a feature of your sectors where there can be a bit of a hot and cold, where the money's switched on for investment, then it's switched off for investment. What opportunity is there for PNG to develop a more sustainable model for resource development, where perhaps we don't get these peaks and troughs, but we have a sort of steady development of the sector over time? Is that an achievable end, do you think, Greg, or is that a possibility?
I think projects are lumpy, unfortunately, and PNG competes with the global capital markets for investment. For example, Newcrest is owned 30% in the US, 30% in Europe, 10% in Asia, and the rest sitting between, around the local Australian market. And we, like all gold companies in the sectors that I deal with, are competing on projects on a global basis. And when prices are strong and the investment windows are open, companies look to build projects. And probably more so in minerals than oil and gas, there is a bit more of a boom and bust mentality. The companies aren't as big, generally the investments aren't as big either, and so you do tend to find the cycle is a bit more volatile. I just make one comment. The long term, I think, for commodities does look very good. I think in the short to medium term, particularly in the short term, the winds have turned very cold. And, I think that is a message people should understand, that really between Europe, the US and China, and where the investment community are and the start of new projects, capital commitment is 10 times harder today than it was 2 to 3 years ago, 5 years ago. It's a short-term phenomenon, I think, but it is something people should be aware of. Within that context, on the minerals side, PNG, by mineral design, has great ore deposits. They are high grade, they are large, they are long life, and the importance of keeping a sustainable business is they must also be high margin or good returns to community, government and companies. That's really what makes a sustainable resource industry, where all participants are doing well.
We shall have the final part of that panel discussion when we come back. Some may say that PNG is a tough country to do business in, but that has not stopped Newcrest Mining or SO Highlands from venturing into our territory. Their approach may vary, but they have been able to develop a relationship with the communities they work in, as well as the state.
Peter, is there something that PNG can do to improve the environment for your sector? I mean, we talked a little bit about infrastructure earlier on with the Minister.
I think for me, probably there are a number of priority areas that need to be worked on. One is infrastructure, clearly. I mean, just the difficulty of moving around and moving large pieces of equipment around the country it's clearly very challenging in today's environment. But from an investment perspective, one of the things that strikes me that's most important is stability, removal of uncertainty around investments. And I'm just reading this morning's paper again, the issue of resource ownership has popped up. The transfer of ownership of resources from the state to landowners. The uncertainty around that is not going to do very much constructive to encourage investment in this country. And I think that issue is something that we've certainly been given some assurances by the new government that it's not going to get legs and move on. But I think for investors looking at the country, wondering about the fiscal regime or the regulatory regime or the ownership regime, that's the sort of thing that makes people nervous and causes them to get concerned about the risk of investing if there's a major shift in the way projects are set up. So to me, that's a concern. The final one I'd mention is, I think Ben Micah may have mentioned this morning as well, is law and order. I mean, for developers to come into the country, they want to be able to provide an assurance to their workforce that comes in that they can work here feeling safe and secure. And again, I know that the current government is focused on working to improve law and order in Papua New Guinea. But today it's a challenge, and we face challenges periodically on some of our work sites with just the way some activities interfere with what we're doing, and understand how the law and order, various sectors of law and order struggle to deal with those issues. I think that's something that's going to have to be addressed. I think it's potentially holding back development in a number of areas, and it certainly challenges us from time to time.
One final question for you both, and it's a short question, so therefore it must be a difficult one by definition. What advice would you give to an organisation looking to set up a major project in PNG based on your own experience? Greg, you want to go first?
I think the first word that comes to mind is stamina. The relentless pursuit of a very major project development. I think many people in the room will know from the approach of a company, the investors, the community and the government, it takes a long time to bring these things together. And so stamina is incredibly important. Consistency, and then I would say the other one is be very close to the community that you're working in, and be very close to the government in your relationships, and use the word listen pretty carefully.
I would just echo those sentiments. I just had different words in mind, patience and persistence, but the same thing, stamina. I mean, if you are easily pushed back, then I'm not sure this is the best place for you to be working. Certainly major projects can be delivered, and we're absolutely confident that we'll deliver our project on schedule in 2014, but it does take a lot of persistence and patience to drive things through. I'd also echo Greg's comments about consultation with the community. I mean, we need to be conscious of the fact that we're visitors in the country, sensitive to local culture, and consult extensively before moving into an area. I think we thought we had done that at least to a degree on our project with early works, where we'd get in and do some early civil works, if you like, to sort of learn how to do things, and also put in place some early infrastructure. Again, with hindsight, perhaps we could have done a little more than that, and got to understand the communities a little better and help those communities understand our culture a little better as well. So working with government's the final area. I think it's important. Well, certainly in the mining and petroleum industry, the state is a shareholder in the project. They hold equity in the project, but they're also a regulator. There's no way the project can be implemented without strong government support. We've enjoyed that pretty much on our project. The government's worked very, very hard to help us deliver. But it is important to maintain that dialogue and provide some support to government agencies that otherwise might struggle to deliver what you need.
So now we have a fair idea of how companies in the extractive industry approach business in PNG. But what are sustainable businesses? Well, we talked to the chairman of Cloudy Bay Sustainable Forestry Limited. That interview when we return. When you think forestry, the first thing that comes to mind would be logging and deforestation. Well, it seems Cloudy Bay Sustainable Forestry believes we can develop this industry into a viable business that can supply the world with much needed timber, an invaluable resource.
Welcome. My guest today is Rob DeFagley, Chairman of the Cloudy Bay Sustainable Forestry Group. Welcome to the show, Rob.
Thank you very much for having me.
Rob, tell us a little bit about Cloudy Bay Sustainable Forestry. How did it start?
Cloudy Bay has a history going back to the 1970s in Popondetta in Oro province, and more recently it was known as Northern District Sawmills here in the National Capital Development District. But it wasn't until about 2006 when the previous owner, the Constantino Group, signed a forest management agreement at Cloudy Bay that the transformation of this company really started. In 2008, PNG Sustainable Development Program Limited invested in the company and began that transformation, which essentially, ultimately, PNG Sustainable became the 100% owner, and they've invested in a total refit of the company for state-of-the-art processing here in Papua New Guinea, with a 150,000 hectare forest management area down at Cloudy Bay, which is about 270 kilometres east of Port Moresby at the end of the Maggie Highway. And our annual harvest is around about 48,000 cubic metres of logs a year, 100% of which are processed here in Papua New Guinea.
And your involvement with it?
I'm the chairman of the company. We have 2% of our workforce are expats. We have a requirement to employ local PNG nationals in the company, and I'm very proud of the fact that when we went to Cloudy Bay, about only 40% of the people who were employed there were locals. We've now transformed that to over 74%, and that's rising. We've got a number of women in quite important positions in the company as well, which I'm also very proud of. We will do more as we build skills in the company, and that's probably one of our biggest issues, is to actually get production up to that 48,000 cubic metre level. At the moment we're not quite there, but we're working very hard to get there.
We commend you on that. Forestry management, that's always been a contentious issue here. How difficult is it?
It's possible, but it requires, it's a much sustainable forest management, and domestic processing is a much more sophisticated business than, say, log export operations, which is one's essentially exploitation and the other is actually sustainable management in perpetuity. It requires more work, but the payoffs are actually stronger in a domestic economy terms. So you're probably going to earn within the economy anything from potentially 10 times the value of the log in sawn timber, and then if you put that into a building, it could be up to 20 or 30 times the value of the product that's exported out as a log. So there are significant payoffs for the Papua New Guinea economy to process onshore, but it's difficult at the moment because we don't have the skills to process here. We don't have the training institutions to be able to train the people that we necessarily need in processing. We don't have the processing facilities. Cloudy Bay is the only FMA that I'm aware of based on natural forest harvesting that's operating on a value-added basis here in Papua New Guinea. So it's going to take time to get the skills, the processing facilities, and then of course the domestic demand to increase as well, and that's quite low at the moment as well.
So it's a long-term...
It is a long-term project, but the beauty of it, when you compare to, say, mining, which some of those projects may only last 10 or 20 years, if done well, it lasts forever.
So what can we as a nation, really, as an economy, develop, or what can we do to develop our timber processing capability here?
It starts with the national government and the provincial governments working together on a national strategy, and that should involve both the government, the industry that's here at the moment, and the education institutions to ensure that everybody understands what that strategy involves. And that would be a combination of both production for domestic and export markets. And so there's a reasonable level of cooperation that's needed by the industry and government. And then ultimately working with local communities and landowners so that they know and understand what this means for them and what it can actually bring. Forestry has a good reputation, if done well, of being a good developer at a regional level. The most cost-effective way of processing resource is to do it close to the resource. So in forest is where you should be processing, because that's the most cost-efficient way of doing it. So it brings local jobs in, but those jobs need to have skills and they need training. And so there's a process that's quite complex to bring training, resource together, and then surrounding infrastructure, so roads and access so you can get product to market and get in to service your processing facilities.
Apart from the obvious infrastructure challenges there are, what would be something that your company would like to see in the way of training support that can be provided for that skill shortage?
Training is a broad spectrum. It transcends from forest supervisors, management training, Papua New Guineans, some who are very skilled but they've never been given the management training to actually manage their own work colleagues to ensure that outcomes are done on a timely manner, so that work is implemented, the project is done on a timely basis, production is important. Many of the people we've got working for us now have had no work ethic. Their parents have never gone to work. So getting up in the morning and being at work at 7 o'clock, 7 days a week is a totally foreign concept to them. And then the equipment is all new as well. So there's lots of training at different levels that need to be done to ensure that Papua New Guinea can have a very cost-effective forest products processing industry.
Particularly because I suppose most of your projects are carried out at grassroots level, aren't they? In
They
remote
yes,
locations.
Absolutely, yes. But I see a bright future. Papua New Guinea's domestic demand will grow as its economy grows. People will want houses, they will want furniture, and Papua New Guinea's got great products, but also we'll have 60% of the world's population living in our region in 2050, and a lot of countries have run out of resources, so Papua New Guinea's still got lots of its own resource, so therefore if it's careful, it can utilise that resource in supplying that demand for many years to come.
Cloudy Bay's sustainable forestry sees a bright future in the country. When we come back, we learn about why forest plantations have failed in the past and how Cloudy Bay has altered their approach to sustaining their business. Forestry is a sleeping giant simply because Papua New Guineans are good at growing crops and we have the types of trees that the world wants. Could this be something we can look into?
So I'm hearing the challenges of what it must be like in business, in forestry products. Can we really expect to develop a sustainable businesses with forestry products?
Yes, look, the science of sustainability in forest management is continually evolving, but I think we do know a lot that can be done to work towards sustainability. But sustainability can be based around production, it can be based around social requirements, environmental requirements. All of those can now be built in, particularly with the tools that we have at available to us now with computers, research, understanding the diversity of the Papua New Guinea forests. That background is all very important to support how you ultimately calculate sustainability. But on top of that, though, we're sort of talking natural forests. Papua New Guinea's also got significant area of grasslands, and Papua New Guineans are good gardeners, so tending trees and extending their skill set into tending and growing and managing trees as part of their utilisation of their land would not be a major step from where they are now. And we know that high value species such as teak, which is known the world over, grows particularly well in Papua New Guinea. So we could develop a significant plantation resource here in Papua New Guinea as well.
Why has it failed before? I know there are so many, you drive down the highway, there are so many old teak plantations.
I think it's a function of timing in some respects. There was a lot of resource around that was cheaper. The structure of the Papua New Guinea forests is different from the rest in Southeast Asia. We're east of the Wallace Line, so we're not Ditrocarp forests like you find in Malaysia or Indonesia, which were much more uniform, and the Meranti species were quite plentiful. So the big markets utilised all of those resources before they came to Papua New Guinea. And I think that the growth in the market is such now that the opportunities are becoming, before there was possibly too much cheap wood around, now that's not the case. I think the world is short of good quality hardwood. There's lots of softwood but not good quality hardwood. And the countries that are well positioned to grow and develop those, and I think in Papua New Guinea's case the early trials have been useful, but we in Cloudy Bay are developing a small, or hoping to develop a small plantation trial to actually start finding out what the research has been and looking a little bit closer at how we might develop some plantation programs somewhere throughout Papua New Guinea.
Right. Now you've recently been quoted talking about social licensing, something that you say is very important. Why do you think it's important? Social
license, it's not enough just to have a legal operation. It's really important to talk to the community, and I'm talking wider than just Papua New Guinea. It's a difficult concept for people who are coming to invest in Papua New Guinea, who are used to an area, coming from a country that has a sort of traditional land title system whereby you can go to a title office and you can determine exactly who owns a piece of land. Here with customary land ownership it's different, but potentially it's very powerful if you work to get the landowners on side with what you're doing. So social license is a journey from moving to getting a legal status for your business from the government, but then talking to the landowners so that they understand exactly what you're planning and proposing to do, ensuring that they understand it. So you move from a point of view of not only being legal, but you get to a point of being credible because you begin to deliver what you've talked about delivering as part of your project, to becoming trusted, and ultimately the ideal is to become a loved business by everyone, which means that you're delivering not only financially for the company, but you're delivering socially for the people who own the land, and you're delivering environmentally. In other words, you're not destroying the resource in the process. And that is, it sounds utopian, but it's in fact a very smart process to follow, because it means you do the background work first, not try and fix it up later once you've found a problem. And it does take time and it does take work, but I think the payoffs would be quite significant if you're prepared to put the time in. And we found within Cloudy Bay that the number of disputes that we had when we first started in 2009 have declined significantly. Today we still have them, and we expect they will still occur from time to time.
Is that because you think there is people more open to the idea, or is there more information around?
I think we've tried to be very consistent with what we do. We in saying we will do this or we won't do that, and the story's always the same. And the communities can now see new teachers' houses, new schools, roads have been built, bridges are about to be built. That gives them great heart that things are beginning to happen in their part of the country, the things that they've looked and longed for a long time. Children have suddenly got a school to go to that's got desks, it's a good school, it's up in the air, it's dry, it's got good, and the teachers like going because the teachers' houses are good. I think those things, that just small things begin to add up over time, where the community begins to say, well, this is actually a good thing for us. And importantly, the resource, we're looking for third-party certification on sustainability of our resource, and we hopefully will achieve that by the end of the year, which will be internationally recognised, so that we continue to work on both our social and environmental, and of course it's a commercial business, so we actually have to make a profit as well to survive and keep doing the things that we're doing.
Do you think the government's doing enough?
Oh, any country I've been to, the government never does enough. Look, I think the government's had lots of challenges, and I'm very heartened and hopeful of things I've heard this morning, that hopefully the government is now beginning to focus on some important things. And, you know, they've got challenges with health, education and infrastructure, and those themes were quite prominent in the address from the government representatives this morning, and I was very heartened by that, and I really hope that they can get on top of some of these things, because it then allows investment to come in and other things to occur, which hopefully will improve the overall living standards for every Papua New Guinean.
How many projects currently does Cloudy Bay Sustainable Forestry have in the country?
We have one main project, which is the FMA operations down at BAM in Cloudy Bay, and we have our wood processing centre at 9 Mile here in Port Moresby. But we are looking at the possibilities of plantations and developing a plantation resource, and we've also looked at potential for biomass and biomass energy using some of our wood waste to generate power. And we're also looking at a couple of other projects in the Western Province and elsewhere in Papua New Guinea to see how we can expand the model that we've started on in Cloudy Bay.
Rob, what's your advice to new intending investors in the forestry sector here?
I think that the important things are to be patient, to take your time, to talk to the landowners and the communities that where you're intending to work, so they understand exactly what you're proposing to do. You need to understand the government regulations, and that's probably the most important thing to begin with, to actually ensure that what you're doing is according to what the government's policy is for Papua New Guinea. And I think also consider how you're going to implement that project, because if you're developing it in a relatively remote area, the skill levels, the infrastructure and things will be quite weak. So you will have to be prepared to bring some of that with you to ensure that your project's a success.
Rob de Fagley, thank you so much for your time today.
A pleasure, Anna. Thank you.
That was Chairman of the Cloudy Bay Sustainable Forestry, Mr. Rob de Fagley.
Thank you for your company. That completes another edition of Resource PNG. You can watch this presentation again online at our Resource PNG page at www.mtv.com.pg. And if you do have any suggestions, please send it to the email address shown on your screen. Until next time, enjoy your week.